David Schultz and the slap heard round the world. What does the slap heard round the world refer to? Well, in this episode of Dark Side of the Ring, season 2, episode 7, that is the title of it. And the slap heard round the world, for those of you who remember, we remember when Dr. D, David Schultz, during an interview with John Stossel for 2020, slapped him not once, but slapped him twice because of the question of, that John Stossel told him. It wasn't even a question. He said, I think wrestling's fake. And then he slaps him once. You think that's fake? Made the mistake of getting back up, slaps him again. That right there set off a lot of chain of events for Dr. D, which led also to his eventual, I guess you can say, banishment and loss of his profession of being a professional wrestler. I remember hearing about it. I didn't see it, but as is a lot of stories at the time, sometimes you don't catch them. But during this time, and it was the early 80s, wrestling was still referred to as real. There was a code of honor, and Dr. D pretty much said that you don't cross that line. You don't tell the trade secrets. In this episode, we see how he came from being a fan, someone who liked wrestling, and he pretty much said, I could do that. He goes to this one guy who trains him in a barn, and this guy was all about making people want to give up. He wanted to test their mettle, if you will, see how they would take it. He literally took a dump, put it on his hand, smeared it under his armpits, and then would lock guys up in a rear choke hold and pretty much hold them there and see whether or not the person is going to stick around. And David Schultz was one of the guys that did, and he continued his training under this gentleman that he found, and found out that he was a natural and was one of the top stars in wrestling at the time. He eventually made his way to WWE, where he became friends with Hulk Hogan and also did a program with Hogan. As Hogan was ascending the ranks and becoming the babyface and face of WWE or WWF at the time, David Schultz was one of the top heels and really was rising in the ranks himself. But the one fateful day when John Stossel asked him that question is what turned it around. And what led to that was this guy named Edward Malibu, if I remember his name. No, Eddie Mansfield. And Eddie Mansfield was known as, I believe his name was Loverboy Eddie Mansfield. And they show him in the ring. He looks like the typical cookie cutter blonde, bleach blonde with the bodybuilder body. You hear the girls screaming and crying and all that, swooning for the guy. And when it came time where they decided to no longer push him and no longer make him a featured attraction, he decides to. The wrestler Eddie Mansfield decided to, because he felt like he wasn't getting what he wanted, he wasn't going where he needed to, and eventually it led to him being the one that was the catalyst for John Stossel from 2020 get a real scoop, because he was always the one that tried to expose companies, people, and all that. And when Eddie Mansfield decided to go to John Stossel and say, I'm going to show you the tricks of the trade and how everything is done in wrestling to show you that wrestling is not real. They don't hit for real. They don't, all the moves are carefully orchestrated and, of course, predetermined and everything. And you see him wrestling John Stossel. John Stossel's even able to do hip tosses on him, and he shows how when you do an elbow drop, you don't even make contact with the person's head or neck or anything, and doing all that head bumps against the turnbuckles. And this guy who he was, being interviewed at Eddie Mansfield, and he was saying that he was doing it for the boys because the thing about it though is that he wanted the reason why what led to him doing this is because he wanted, you know, a 401k and he wanted insurance and he wanted to be taken care of, and they didn't want to hear it. And then he says, if you guys don't, you know, do this for us, then I'm going to expose everything. They didn't agree. So, okay, so he decides to go and do what he did. And John Stossel is backstage, and McMahon is there. It's McMahon, and he's interviewing these guys. And then he said, "Okay, your next guy that you're going to be interviewing is Dr. D. David Schultz." Even that guy Eddie Mansfield was like, "Oh man, if anybody don't interview, Dr. D, because this guy lives kayfabe, he doesn't break it." And and then like I said in the beginning, John Stossel says, I believe that wrestling is fake." And then what ensued was something that David Schultz really didn't think about afterwards. He went and had his match against Antonio Inoki. He lost the match. And then when he went backstage, McMahon told him, don't shower, don't do nothing, get dressed, go home, go to your hotel. Then he gets shipped off to Japan in order to everything to cool off. And then what happens is that while in Japan, the promoters there want him to do the very same thing that he did, the very thing that he did in America, and that is to slap a reporter. And you see it on the news report, you see it on the newspapers and all that stuff. How is that going to look? That probably made it worse. So when he comes back, after a while, and then all of a sudden we hear, he's a guy who wants to keep kayfabe, right? He wants to make it appear real. He doesn't want, their trade secrets to be revealed and all that stuff. Always about, never ever saying that what they do is choreographed or predetermined and all that. And then Vince McMahon comes up with the idea of WrestleMania. But in WrestleMania, right? And before that, you see McMahon finally coming out to say that wrestling is sports entertainment. You don't want to be referred to as wrestling because you don't want to be regulated anymore by the state. And then all these other promotions at the time started following suit. And Dr. David Schultz was going, Dr. D was saying that, we're trying to keep kayfabe going. We're trying to, and then he comes out and now he wants it to be referred to as sports entertainment. And when he did what he did to John Stossel, he got a lot of heat for it. He lost his career pretty much. Hogan, who of course was the chosen one, nothing was going to happen to him. And, there's, the very, very famous incident that he had with Richard Belzer, where he put him in a rear chokehold. And, Belzer passed out. And you see how his head just snaps out of Hogan's grip, and he just slams his head on the floor. And, WWE got sued and like that. And, but Dr. D was like, okay, so then why come he didn't get, in trouble for it, But Jim Cornette, who was a part of this, he's been a part of a number of the episodes. He said that nothing was going to happen to Hogan. Hogan was the golden boy. He was the chosen one. So nothing was going to happen to him. Hogan, you see Hogan even apologizing and stuff like that. But he did kind of say that, well, if someone laughs at me, I'm going to put a move on them. And that's a chokehold, a simple chokehold. Well, he thought it was simple, but you saw what happened with a comic, Richard Belzer. And then, like, the whole thing again with WrestleMania, the first one. They bring in a bunch of celebrities, but mainly the top one was Mr. T. And Dr. D was like, well, what about me? I think it's a mistake, he thought it was a mistake that you bringing in all these celebrities and all that stuff. And there was conflicting stories about how he said pretty much that he was just talking to T and trying to just, befriend him and everything. And then Chief J Strongbow told him, pretty much was told by McMahon that if he's talking or bothering Mr. T, that he was going to be fired. And then Chief J Strongbow, who was the manager or backstage, person, he's a world famous wrestler in his day, I believe like the 50s, 60s. And he fired him. And then there was an incident where, Dr. D says, I'm going to go and I'm going to go and watch the matches. And then he sees Mr. T there and he's talking to him. And then he claimed that the police, two guys were on him. And they cuffed him, they shackled him and everything like that. And they threw him out of the back door. And Hogan, then you hear an interview with Hogan. It was just his voice. And you hear him say that Dr. D actually grabbed Mr. T and actually was harassing him. So it's like, those two used to be tight as friends in the beginning of their careers. And according to Dr. D, Hogan turned his back on him. And there's a lot of people that say that Hogan really changed as he got moved up the card, if you will, moved up the ranks and became the top wrestler of the 80s and 90s, especially the 80s when Hulkamania was born. And then, he decides to, he's no longer a wrestler, he's no longer allowed, pretty much blacklisted, as he thinks. And he decides to become a bounty hunter because he had a friend who was a police officer. And he becomes very, very successful at it and well known for being one of the best bounty hunters of his time. You see him throughout the entire, episode, and he's being interviewed and he's talking, he's very candid. And you see him and he's a gray old man now. And he doesn't look as tough as he used to, but that he's got that in him still to be, that Dr. D as we all know him to be. And he was really quite a figure. I've always only heard about him. I've never seen him wrestle. I've never seen any of his tapes or any of his matches. And when they showed some of the stuff they showed in there, this dude was a tough dude. Definitely looks like an early version of like what Psycho Sid. Maybe that's what he patterned, Psycho Sid after, because the guy looks just like him. And I think that if he hadn't gotten into that trouble, it may have been him and Hogan in the main event for the first WrestleMania. He would have been involved somehow. He would have been there, and he would have probably had a program with Hogan because he was the top heel, as Hogan was the top rising babyface, champion, and everything. But then, like I said, he goes on to become a bounty hunter, which was a perfect fit for him, like he said, because he knows how to. He says, if you're a wrestler, pro wrestler, you know how to get somebody in a hole, you know how to hold them down, you know how to keep them from moving, you know how to manipulate their body parts so that you can keep them in place and stuff like that. And there's this guy that they had a hard time finding, and then one night he found him, and this is one of those things where what if he hadn't done what he did to John Stossel, who ended up getting a settlement of $285,000, something like that. And the guy was talking about how after he got slapped 2 times, he had ringing in his ear, and when his daughter was just a baby at the time, every time she cried, it would hurt his ears. And a lot of so there's one part where one of the I guess the doctors, or he says, I don't know why he said first a doctor and it sounded like he said a lawyer or something like that, but it was one of their officials, and he said that he thought that John Stossel was just holding in his pain, pretending to be more in pain than he was, until he got a settlement, or until the case was over. And then once he even said that once he got the settlement, the pain went away. So what does that say about him? Was he really in pain? Or he said that he got slapped in the ears, got ringing in the ears, but then what do you call it? Dr. D said that he just slapped him, open palm, slapped him on his face. I mean, the guy's was a big dude, muscular and everything like that. So even if he slapped him on the face, he probably felt it in his ears, John Stossel. And then the last thing when they asked him, "What do you want to say to Doctor, to David Schultz?" and he said, "I said fuck you." Dr. D or David Schultz. So he pretty much just out now. He's flat out just said that. So there's no love lost there. There's no forgiveness on his part. And I think Dr. D he could care less. He said, you know what I mean. So this is one of those episodes where didn't know the full story about it, and after this, it's just like, okay, that's what happened. That's why you never really hear about him, because his career was pretty much over. Before the rise of Hulkamania and all these big time superstars that were coming out of that same time, because a lot of people rode that wave with Hogan. Dr. D would have definitely done that too. But what happened with the 2020 incident and all that stuff, that was it after that. But yeah, those were my thoughts on Dark Side of the Ring. Which was Dr. Schultz, David Schultz, and the Slap Heard Around the World. Season 2, episode 7. And there are 3 more to go, 8, 9, and 10. And they're very, very good. Looking forward to these 3. And I'm going to finish those out as the weeks go by. And can't wait to watch them all. I'm looking forward to the Owen Hart one, and that's the last one. So until that happens, until I review that, I'm gonna have to watch the other 2. But I'm looking forward to those. So, but anyway, that's my video. And for those of you who stopped by and checked it out, I appreciate it. And in closing, as always, take care. Please remember to subscribe, click like, and click the bell icon for all notifications on this channel.